Diversity is a major component of innovation and prosperity. Different people from different backgrounds and different experiences bring different ideas and passions to the table and approach problems from different perspectives. Women represent 46.6% of the overall workforce in the US, and even more in Canada and members of the European Union. But women only hold 26.7% of technology sector jobs, an even smaller percentage among senior technical positions. Women leave the tech field at twice the rate of men, and furthermore, firms that are led by women don't get access to nearly as much capital as firms led by men. In 2021, women-led firms only received 2.1% of VC funding. Blockchain and DeFi may represent an opportunity to change these statistics. This is a new space with new rules and has the potential to create value in new ways. My name's Doug Heinzman. I'm the Chief Catalyst at the Blockchain Research Institute. Welcome to W3B Talks, an ongoing exploration of the impact of Web3 and blockchain technologies on business, government, and society. In this episode, we're going to look at the role of women in the new economy. And we're very fortunate to be joined today by Kara Howard. Kara is the founder of Key, a public benefit organization focused on unlocking the untapped potential of the new economy. Welcome to the podcast, Kara.
Thank you so much for having me, Douglas.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. This is a topic that I have been very focused on for a very long time, quite a bit of a passion. And I just, really comes down to the fact that we have to have a lot of diversity in the economy just because it is so fundamental and foundational to innovation. But before we kind of really get into that topic, can you just share with us your personal story? How did you come to this space and decide to put your efforts and energies into founding Key?
Yeah, so my background is in finance and technology, and I have found myself really being a part of more, male-represented industries. And about 5 years ago, as I was community building in different ways for women, I discovered my passion, which is really about, elevating the voices of women in the industry and having more of their presence being seen. And so I found myself really seeing that in particular in the areas of AI and futurism, which I worked in, there's so little representation. And it was a specific article that I read that was profiling Elon Musk in Vanity Fair. And there was this image that he was speaking to of 15 futurists and their perspectives on the future of AI and potential implications of it. And it really stuck out to me because of these 15 futurist images, there was not one woman profiled. And it was at that time, as I had already had quite a bit of experience building community for women, that I started my own community called the Feminine Intelligence. And we brought women from, different forms of AI and technology to the forefront to start speaking to these issues and also educating other women. And that really started to land my feet in the broader space of blockchain and Web3. It was not called Web3 back then. And so now I have this nonprofit that I've started called The Key. And our focus is taking women from the existing women that are in the industry and building up their professional brands and elevating their voices. As often we can't be what we can't see, and the data points are showing actually, and you gave great statistics there. When you get even more specific around Web3, there's 93% of Web3 founders are male, and 73% of the employees in the industry are male. So I think you touched on a data point that was, roughly 50% of women in the workforce. But now when you get into Web3 specifically, it's dramatically going down, and they're finding that numbers are actually even retracting from the traditional tech industry.
Why do you think that is? I mean, the other statistics I think are important. McKinsey did a study not too long ago that found that companies that were in the top quartile for gender diversity in their executive teams were 25% more likely to experience above average profitability than companies in the bottom percentile. Another report by AnitaB.org found statistically significant evidence that companies that had relatively higher levels of gender diversity in technical roles had substantially, or at least significantly, higher levels of innovation and had much better problem-solving capabilities, as well as enhanced company reputation. So if the statistics show that diversity is an important contributor to profitability and innovation, why are we where we are to begin with? And second of all, if Web3 is this new environment, this new slate, this blank slate that I alluded to in the introduction, why aren't women more broadly represented?
Yes, that's definitely a complex, multi-layered conversation point, an issue. And in my experience, what I've found is there's a few different factors. Number one, there's generally an issue with women I found, and I like to actually place this opportunity on the women themselves versus pointing fingers at the men in the industry. That is another layer of this complex issue, but I like to say, what I've experienced is that women have a layer of feeling not, they step into some kind of imposter syndrome for themselves. And because there's this wiring that we have potentially, because I hear it over and over and over, of perfectionism and having to be at a certain level before feeling confident enough to go and putting yourself out there. That to me is the key issue that I've seen, because I think there's layers within that. I think that there's been challenges from the last 500 years where we haven't seen women in leadership. So when you can't be what you can't see, what you do see is the very few successful women out there at major CEO leadership levels that you think you have to get to this extreme level of, experience and intelligence to be that. And it's not true. So there's this ingrained limiting belief that I see across the board, again, where there's this feeling of not being good enough. And I think you can see it in all forms of, a lot of forms of media as well that are, valuing certain aspects of women that we've learned from a very young age, and the media doesn't help also. So that's a big part of what we are encouraging women to do throughout our program. We actually have one education module on limiting beliefs by a confidence coach that guides the women into understanding what are those mental blocks and barriers that you're feeling that you actually don't feel good enough. I've had many interviews with women that say they're actually even invited to speak on conference panels and in podcasts, and they turn down the opportunities because they don't feel that they're good enough. And they've had to have other people in their life encourage them to say, "Are you kidding me? You're an expert on this topic. Put yourself out there." And when they put themselves out there, that's what I found with having placed over 300 women in speaking opportunities. It's a track. It's a track that you do just like anything else in your life. And learning a new tool, you put yourself out there and you start practicing, and your confidence level starts to go up and up and up and up. And so that's what we built with See Her, is this track where, first of all, you're going to be a part of a community seeing many other women putting themselves out there. And when you hear people speak, men or women, or in interviews, often you find, well, actually, I have pretty similar insights, or, I could speak to that level. So you start to notice that frame of reference that you've had, that one has maybe had of feeling inferior, it starts to dissolve. So this inferior complex is a major layer. And then, of course, due to the very technical nature of Web3, then you get into the pipeline issue around blockchain developers and developers in general. So I know there's a lot of great organizations that are working on this. And when I speak to them and what has their learnings been, they find that actually there isn't necessarily a major pipeline issue. What often happens to the young women that are going, or the women that are going through the programs, is they also then start to run into that roadblock of feeling not good enough. and they stop coding, and they feel like they can't do it, and they stop.
Yeah, it seems
So,
that you're alluding to kind of a couple of major issues there. One of which is the vicious cycle, right? The stereotypes that you talked about, that there are certain stereotypes about who is in this industry and who succeeds in this industry, and all of the heroes of the industry are of a certain type. And as a result, people aren't necessarily incentivized to pursue education in these technical fields and programming and engineering because they don't see people like them in the roles that they would aspire to if they did pursue that. But so that's kind of one part of the problem. But the other part of the problem is that it seems that there is a culture in tech that women leave at twice the rate that men do out of the sector. Now, there's got to be some sort of cultural situation that makes it less interesting or less comfortable, or less remunerative, or something is causing this disproportionate balance to leave the sector. And it does seem that there's these kind of vicious cycles. So the challenge that I think you're focused on is kind of how to break that cycle to allow women to not only participate just because it's a good idea to kind of democratize and provide equal access, but because it's good business, right? And we as a society, we as an economy need the energies and the innovation and the passions of different perspectives and different experiences, different backgrounds to be all mixed up so that we can actually make progress as a species. So, that kind of comes down to the obvious question, how do we fix that problem? And we've been at it for a long time now. But the bigger specific question I was kind of on was this Web3 environment that seems to have these new characteristics, that seems to be much more democratizing, seems to be more global. It seems to allow much smaller economic entities to compose their services, to collaborate with each other, to coordinate with each other so that they can create composite goods and services that they bring to the marketplace, that the role of kind of big companies and big corporations will give way to much smaller, more niche-oriented actors that all work together to create something. And in that kind of environment, number one, you might actually have a different kind of culture emerging because you're not going to have kind of that big tech company culture. But second of all, it involves a whole bunch of communication and interpersonal skills and problem-solving skills and coordination skills that, well, once again, I suppose going back to stereotypes, but there's actually a bunch of science behind it, that women are really strong at, that they have a very important contribution to make. So my hypothesis is that Web3 does reset the table a little bit, and it's an opportunity to be more inclusive and to harness the creative potential of a very large sector of the population that isn't actively participating at the same rates in this sector. Am I wrong on this, or?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of interesting points here, and there's a lot of ways that this industry could go. And I think what I see is the early adopters that are coming in or already in, the women that are excited, they're often sharing and posting that they're not going to give up. They see this as the future. They believe in the decentralized technology aspects, and they also see the community layer as something that they haven't experienced before in other industries. So this is an important data point and a topic to talk about the community aspect. So there's the community aspect from the people that are participating in the industry in terms of the employees and the founders and the builders. And then there's the community aspect in what these technologies can actually do for communities and the way that we interoperate and this interoperability layer that many of us are working on building in different ways. So this is what I see is unique and exciting to many of the new entrants and those that are sticking the course, because it is not an easy time out there for anyone in the industry, tech or Web3, as it's so new and women are finding their niches, and being a part of risky startups with not a lot of runway, or really just, self-made communities and wanting to grow this member bases. So I see a lot of challenges out there, but there are a lot of people that are like, I'm sticking the course with this because I believe in it.
So, so I apologize for interrupting, but you just hit something really important that I wanted to just kind of tease out a little more. You mentioned risk. If I'm right about this hypothesis that this Web3 environment is much more entrepreneurial, it's much smaller economic actors, that are participating in an ecosystem, there is a lot more potential for entrepreneurship and startup and people filling economic niches in the marketplace. There is inherently risk involved in that. It's very different than becoming an employee of a big company and collecting a paycheck and being able to depend on the stability of a large organization. It's a much more dynamic situation, which has a lot more opportunity, but it does require strategic risk-taking. How do we help women learn or inculcate, absorb the essence of strategic risk-taking? Because there does seem to be, I don't know if it's genetic or whether it's cultural, but my belief, perhaps ignorant belief, is that women by and large don't have the same risk-taking profile. It may be instinctive, but how do we encourage women to understand or to embrace strategic risk-taking to a greater extent?
Yes, there are data points and research showing that women are much more risk averse in entering the crypto space, for example. So I think that that's something that some people are working on, and we're encouraging in our course actually to show how to demonstrate and teach women how to enter the crypto investing market. Not necessarily that they have to go and make large investments, but at least being aware of it. So I think if there's I don't know exactly the data points, but I remember reading, maybe we can find it's maybe a third of the investors or less are women in the industry. So if you think about, okay, currency is driving markets, right? And if you don't understand the currency and you don't have an interest or you're in fear because it feels too risky to even make an entry point into getting a wallet or making an initial, very small investment, then you're not really that invested in the market itself, right? And there's also interesting what you said, like, where is this risk aversion potentially coming from? Is it genetic? There's also studies that show that when capital is given to women versus men, women invest 90% of capital into community-based activities. Now, this is not with technology layers, but they gave groups of women in developing worlds money and groups of men capital. And 90% of the capital spent in the women's pool was on community-related initiatives. 30% of the capital shared with the men's related pool was spent on community, and the rest was spent on their own, on themselves. So that shows you, and yes, I think that has a lot to do with our wiring. And it's like, okay, so there's some layers here that are innate in us that we feel that we are very connected to community and collaboration. Great. That's exactly what decentralization is supposed to be about, right? Now, where is the next block? Well, the next block is, for whatever reason, I'm feeling limiting beliefs in being able to enter the currency and capital markets in this industry, because I feel it's too risky, and because maybe, again, I have limiting beliefs in terms of my ability to understand it. Because when I see 90%, almost 100% of the YouTubers, TikTok teachers of crypto, they're men. So I'm not really seeing an example out there of who I could be. But there are communities that are starting to break through this. So when a woman's feeling empowered with at least making, maybe an initial NFT investment or, starting to trade in crypto a little bit. Okay, now she knows what it feels like to be in this capital market, this currency market. And so that's from like a user perspective. And from a builder perspective, what I see is that the community element of Web3 is fantastic. And this is how most of the companies are growing in Web3, is through different forms of community. And this is taking it from before in Web2, we would call it users, right? Our customers are users, and now our customers are community members. But the structure of many of these companies and startups are still very much built around a venture capital kind of old world tech system. So I feel like that is one of the major layers that we can start to see further inclusion in the decision making of the leadership of these Web3 startups. Whether if you're not a blockchain developer and that's not your thing, if you're a woman, okay, great. But how can you have your voice make more of an impact in the startup that you're participating in? Otherwise, you're going to want to leave, which is what many women are doing.
Yeah, once again, you touched on some really interesting topics there. I think one of the really interesting parts of the Web3 phenomena is this idea that it is much more community oriented, that it can be used to do. Well, I've been doing a lot of work in refi lately, figuring out climate change issues and pollution issues and microfinancing issues. That we have new capabilities around fractional ownership and distributed governance that are allowing us to tackle some very non-traditional problems, right? We're not just creating products to go and sell in the marketplace. We're harnessing the collective activities and energies of groups of people to solve communal problems. And it would seem to me that women have a very, very important role to play in that new emerging economy. So that kind of brings us around to this question of what is the key and what is the C her. I get it. It's spelled SI, but it's pronounced C her platform. What you've built this platform, and what is it? How does it work? What's it trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so the key is a nonprofit. That's how I've set it up, but we're not a charity, and we have a platform that's set up as like a track. So this platform the intentions of it is to accelerate the women and non-binary individuals that are already in the industry in terms of helping them develop their professional brand profiles, create a thought leadership presentation. So in our platform and in our program, they receive education modules from different experts in building one's professional brand profile. And then they create a thought leadership presentation. They record themselves and they put it up on their See Her page. So we've created actually See Her decentralized websites that all of our members receive so that they have their own ETH URL and can share their profile along with this thought leadership presentation. So it's been very fascinating to see our members go through this process where they're thinking, okay, so I know I can build this, my bio page with See Her, and I can go and, populate my brand values and have this nice link instead of a link tree to share on my social networks who I am. Then when they go into creating this thought leadership presentation, we guide them through this process. It's now taking them into this space of like, oh, I have never thought of myself as a thought leader. Right, exactly. That's because you haven't necessarily taken the time, or even you're looking at these, really well-known influencers out there. There's all different levels of influence that you can have. So it's been really cool to see women going into this inward process and coming out on the other side after they've created their thought leadership presentations and start speaking to an initiative that's meaningful for them. So, for example, mine is the See Her DeFi thought leadership content program. And so for me, DeFi stands for diversity, equity, and financial inclusion, as well as the traditional DeFi acronym. I love a lot of these play on words. So now I'm like, okay, so what does that mean for me? Well, I've created a LinkedIn interview series where I interview women and we talk about the idea of DeFi from decentralized finance as well as financial inclusion. And now I'm also building a model that's around that. And so my background, yes, is a financial analyst and a growth marketer. So I'm combining those two different, career experiences that I've had and developing a valuation model that attracts additional layers of value that we're not necessarily seeing yet often talked about or put into practice in the workplace. So for example, there's interesting data points around women that feel included in their organizations are 11 times more likely to be promoters of their company. Okay, so if we know that 30% of women right now are looking to leave their jobs, and we know that financially diverse teams outperform financially, I think it would be in an organization's best interest to retain and engage the employees that they have. So how do they do that? Well, similarly to what I had at my previous role at a company called CleverTap, I had male founders that were very open to me sharing my voice in the public spheres. I got thought leadership presentations. I had speaking at conferences. As through the 4 years I was there, it very much elevated my personal brand profile, and it also supported the company's profile as well and got us new customers. So it's this win-win-win when you give your female employees space to become who they are, who they want to be, and give them, like, whether they want to support them in being a part of See Her, or they just say, hey, yes, we're going to give you some space to actually go out there and put your voice out there. It dramatically increases the retention of that woman at your company. And then on top of it, she's now feeling great about her job. She's getting leads for the company or herself. Maybe she's starting a side business as well, so she feels more fulfilled, so she doesn't need to quit her full-time job and take massive risk that comes with that, often starting her own thing. So these are the type of metrics that I'm starting to organize in our valuation model, in this DeFi model.
So it sounds like there's a bunch of kind of key elements here, right? One is building models and frameworks and doing education so that, women can get some core skills that are, relevant, contribute a lot of value to the marketplace. It also sounds like you're trying to tell stories that holding up some examples of people that are making, really valuable contributions and doing important, impactful work, that storytelling is part of the equation. And the third thing, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it also, when I was looking at the website, it also appears that you're trying to make, these exceptional people more kind of discoverable, that, allowing them to build their own brands so that they are discoverable. People can identify, recognize, and then engage with those skills. Is that a reasonable summary of what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, exactly. And so after assessing the market and seeing, like, okay, the majority of the women in the space are in marketing and customer facing roles, social media, head of brand, PR, communications, operations, chiefs of staff. Okay, so that's the demographic we have that is currently here. And I know there's a lot of great organizations working on the developer pipeline issue for women. Our focus is mainly on bringing those women that are in the industry and their voices to the forefront, and also supporting them in being able to be more creators of their own reality. As I mentioned before, it's like, okay, well, so if you are actually putting yourself out there as the VP of marketing and you're going out and you're getting podcast interviews and you're speaking at conferences, are you being compensated for that? Because your role is actually extremely critical for growing the company. These companies won't go anywhere unless you're out there actively growing them. And so your skills, you may not actually be fully compensated to the level that you should be. Yes, often companies have performance bonuses and things like that, but there's so many women that are not necessarily in straight sales roles, but they are in the customer facing roles. So another part of this model is encouraging, okay, well, we're actually we're able to track the traffic that's coming to your website. And you can track internally how many leads you're getting from your company by putting your voice out there. So whatever agreement you want to work out with your company, but if you're bringing in $40,000 of new business because you're putting yourself out there, I think there's something that would be meaningful for you to be more financially included in that.
Can you share your perspective and outlook on the Web3 as an ecosystem for underrepresented communities?
I really feel like there's going to be some kind of seismic shift that's going to happen. And this is my optimistic outlook. I have some theories, some that are more spiritual than others, about how we actually are going to, as a human species, really truly hone in on what our real values are if we want to make it. And I don't know if this, I know it's really dire, but when you look at the existential risks and where we're at on those, it's not a great outlook. And we know that as technologists, we have the opportunity to, along with community, to really be able to make a shift here and see and demonstrate, okay, what are the other metrics outside of maybe the capitalist metrics that we can see economic impact coming from doing good projects and doing good work. So there's different theories about how that might come to be, but as this track that we're on right now, I think that we're going to see some consolidation of the startup ecosystem in Web3. What I'm seeing is that there's thousands of blockchains, tens of thousands of currencies, a lot of startups that are building very similar things. And I don't think that in our present market that many of those are going to make it. And I think it's been all part of this process of like, okay, well, there's so many new things to build, but where is the actual adoption? And I know many of us don't want us to see going back into some sort of monopolistic, structure, but at the same time, okay, maybe we need just a couple blockchains and we need a few currencies that are actually going to be adopted.
If you look at those, the Gartner hype cycle, it's always kind of fun during the first part of the hype cycle to get out and educate and dream about what the art of the possible is and do lots of speeches and stuff. But I, as a technology strategist, I always find the trough of disillusionment when we go through consolidation, when we edit down to the really high quality stuff that's going to be impactful in the long term and start to progress into the plateau of adoption, that's the really interesting time because that's when we identify the really high value projects that are going to have long-term sustainable impact. So this is an exciting time, which kind of really begs the essential question that, if you were able to have a discussion with your younger self at the very, at the genesis of your own career, or if you're talking to someone else, or if you're talking to one of your peers that is trying to figure out their place in the new economy, what kinds of advice would you give to those different audiences?
I would give myself advice to really start to have learned from the beginning how to create my reality. And I think that's what I see a lot of younger people doing now. Structures that existed 20 years ago for stability and are not as solid anymore. And so what I love to see is young people that are developing their passions, their purpose from a much younger age. I don't remember in school being asked what my passions are or having exploratory classes in that, nor in college. And I think that's a major missing piece of our education system. And so part of going into what can make a successful outcome for humanity along with the technologies we're talking about, to me, is finding out what is your inner voice telling you want to create. And it's a process, and it's an iterative process. But maybe some of us won't need to get to 40 years old to be able to really do that inner work. And that's what I'm excited about with some of these new models and structures that are being built, where we can actually hopefully see some economic potential for the younger people that are putting in their purpose to whatever they want to build. And so I think I would have started that journey for myself a little bit earlier.
That's a really interesting idea that, in the last economy, the economy that many of us lived through for the last 30, 40, 50 years, when we entered the workforce, most of us would have kind of assumed that we were going to perform some sort of function in service of someone else's passion, right? That we were part of a bigger machine. But the web economy seems to be different, because it has this infrastructure that's going to allow us to address these very marginal niches much more cost effectively and have services that are composed instead of having to kind of build entire stacks. that it does offer the opportunity for us to identify and pursue a distinct passion. And that's a really interesting way of framing it. So, well, thank you for that. I like that idea that one of the key differences in the Web3 economy is your ability and potential to pursue a passion. That sounds like a really, really great piece of advice.
Now, if we can just go build it for them, it's like, okay, so you either can't afford college, or you're in the developing world, or you're just, graduated and you're like, okay, now what do I want to do? Imagine if there's a platform that can actually, they can create revenue for whatever their micro passions are, and maybe in the form of NFTs.
Yeah, the barrier to entry has fallen so much because there's so much infrastructure that you can build upon that it becomes affordable to pursue your passions, regardless of how narrow and niche they are.
Exactly. And I'm totally bullish on NFTs. I think there's so many unique use cases that we're just reaching into, like picture of Fiverr, like goods and services marketplace that's actually connected to NFTs. And that's something that you feel more connected to. I think also, like, I love using services like Fiverr and Upwork and things, but I feel like also what's missing is that interest layer. So, you're just providing a service for someone or creating a digital asset for someone. But what if you're actually hiring people that are with aligned purposes and passions, and how you have a micro community around it, versus just a transactional service?
Thank you, Kara, for joining us today and sharing your insights and passions with us. And thank you all for joining us today for this episode of W3B Talks. You can find out more information about the See Her platform at si.her.live. And you can find out more information about this and many other topics at blockchainresearchinstitute.org. And also invite you to subscribe to our newsletter. I'm your host, Doug Heintzman. We hope that you will join us for our next episode of W3B Talks.